Hello, and welcome to I Remember When, sponsored by the Gresham Historical Society. I'm Gwenda McCall. This evening, our guest wears many hats for the Historical Society, but one of her favorite volunteer activities is talking to the primary grade school children about Gresham pioneer life. And this evening, she's agreed to come tell us some of the fascinating stories that she tells the students. I'd like you to meet Arlie Harris. Arlie, thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you for having me.
Why don't we pretend like we're in a fourth grade classroom and you just go ahead and tell us your story.
Well, first I'd like to introduce my associate, Barbara McCall. Barbara will be our projectionist today. And also she is my right-hand man that keeps all the slides together. Now, we are from the Gresham Historical Society. Who knows what a historical society is or what it does? Gwenda, do you know?
How about they gather information from the past to preserve it for the future?
Hey, hey. What does the Gresham Historical Society do?
Gathers local information?
Yes. Yes, it gathers and records
Oh, records.
news and events about people and happenings in early Gresham. Our program today is called Facts and Stories. In 1849, the immigrants had come to just a twinkle to coming into this Oregon Territory because they were all going into California at the gold strike. And then Congress passed a law in 1850 that between 1850 and 1855, any single man could have a half a mile of land.
A square, half a mile.
Half mile square, that's right. And any married man could have a whole mile. Now, you were supposed to be able to, even earlier than that, you were supposed to be able to walk around a mile square in a day, and that's quite often what they would go by.
That's how they'd measure off their property? They'd walk around in a day, okay.
And you would buy that for your square. Also in 1889, in the Gresham area, there were about 5 cabins.
Wow.
And it was thick woods. The whole thing was simply forest, virgin forest. It had never been cut. We had lots of bear, lots of cougars, wolves. I don't know if anybody actually saw a wolf because I think I've always heard they were further north, but this is what I've been told, whether it's fact or story. Now in the little settlement, you might call it, of Gresham, there was a man called Benjamin Franklin Rollins. He was one-armed school teacher who had come back from back east. He was one of the Metzger stepsons. And he started a store. It would have been on Powell and Main. And he thought, if I could have a post office in my store, I would have lots more people settle here, and I would make more money. And so he circled a petition. About the time he was ready to send his petition in, being a good Democrat, he didn't do it in a big hurry. The Republicans sent around a petition, and they petitioned Campground. And they sent in their petition, and they put up the name, Campground. It was the town.
They were going to call Gresham Campground?
Yes, it was called Campground.
Why
for all of 6 weeks. Well, this is the name that they chose. Campground was actually what it was called. There were 16 acres in back of the Methodist Church. That would have been on the southeast corner of Roberts and Powell. And this is where the immigrants coming over the Barlow Trail would stop, or people who had come in by train and had no other place to go would stop and camp in here. It was called Campground, and everybody knew about it. Also, revivals were held in here. As any circuit rider would go through and hold a revival, they would go to Campground. And when Rollins got around to sending his petition, and he was a very clever young man, he petitioned that it be named Gresham. And since the attorney postmaster, is that what he's called?
Postmaster General?
Postmaster General. I thought that and thought, why would he be called a general? Okay, a Postmaster General his last name was Gresham, and he was very pleased, and he named it Gresham, and the name Campground came down.
Good thinking.
But people continued to come in then.
Now, these are people in covered wagons?
These are the people in the covered wagons.
Let's take a break and show a picture
All right.
of a family in a covered wagon. This is a
This
very
is typical
picture I found, and it looks like any family who could have come in to Gresham. There are 3 children, and the mother probably had that baby on the way in the wagon.
Nice boy to bounce along, bouncing baby boy. All right. Now this Oregon Trail through which they came started in Joplin, Missouri. And they came across the plains through all the heat, across the Rocky Mountains and all the ice and the snow. And when they would get to Fort Hall in Idaho, many of the wagons would still go to California because of the gold. But lots of them came on into Oregon, where they get as far as where Dufur is now. Well, this has to be a very condensed version, so I leave off a great deal tonight. But when they would take the Barlow Trail, they would come down the Zigzag River and so forth and come into the campground that we just talked about. Now, Sam Barlow had petitioned to have 5 toll gates on that road. And these were, I'm sure the word franchise was not known in that day, but they were, the men who had charge of the toll gate could charge what he wanted to charge. And so the fellow up here, where they first hit, he charged about 10 cents for each pig, each chicken, each sheep, and 50 cents for the cattle. I'm rounding out the figures. And $1 for the horse and the people. Well, the next fellow at the toll gate, they didn't have so much left. The time they got down to the 5th one, about all they had left was something to barter with. Maybe they had a little flour or something. So the fellow down here would have got along a lot poorer than the one up at the top. But they did come down, and it was a very terrible trip, very terrible trip. I have seen the trees where the rope burns and the chain burns on them, where they've let the wagons down, where they put the belly straps under the cattle and the horses and let them bellowing and crying down over these cliffs till they got down. Now, a mule can find his way down, or a deer can find his way down, but a horse or an oxen can't do that. But the rest of the people came into the Dalles. My grandmother was 12 years old when the Richardsons came in. There were 5 boys and 3 girls in the family. And they went up above the Dalles, that would have been east of the Dalles, towards Briggs Junction, and floated the wagons across the river, landing in what is now called Maryhill.
The wagons, they just put them right in the water?
They would take the wheels off and the tongue, put inside the wagon with the family. The kids said that was the only time they ever got to ride. They had to walk all the rest of the way.
Oh, really?
But,
and they floated. They didn't sink?
No, they didn't sink.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
But the very first wagon they put in, they'd left the horses on it, thinking the swimming horses would get it across. Instead, the horses become frightened and confused and tipped the wagon over.
And they lost everything,
They lost everything they had. The family was saved, but they lost the horses and they lost all their goods.
How awful.
So Grandpa Richardson, then my great-grandfather, brought the family across, went in 10 miles towards where Goldendale is now, and homesteaded in there on what is known as Buttermilk Creek. The rest of the wagons came down. Now the Harrises were Irish. They were from Ireland, from the potato famine. They went into Kentucky, where they must have been there several generations since they came across in 16-something.
Now, this is your husband's family, Harris's. Okay.
And there was always some adventurous soul in there, so one of them gathered up the horses and 3 wagon loads of tobacco plants, and they started out. They had 7 children, stopped in Missouri and had an 8th one.
Oh, my.
And then they brought the horses and the wagons across. And as they were coming across the plains and had come into Idaho, which is unusual, evidently, there were skirmishes all along the road because the Indians wanted horses from anybody and everybody they could get them from. And they had not actually had fights, but this time one of the Indians shot several arrows, evidently at random, and one of them pierced the top of the canvas top of the wagon, and hit Arlie Harris, killed her. She was still nursing the baby.
Oh.
And so Grandpa Harris brought them across on into the Dalles, 8 children. The baby, they said, was brought in on sugar tit and bacon rinds.
What's that, a sugar tit? What is that?
Sugar tit is heavens, I remember those when I was a kid. They put sugar in a nice clean rag, and the child went around sucking on it, just like they would candy. You didn't have candy in those days. You didn't have evaporated milk. You didn't have anything sweet other than what you baked yourself or dried fruit. Anyway, he came into what he always called Stumptown. He never called it Portland, although I'm sure that it was called Portland then. But in those days, when they cut the trees, their saws were only so long and the trees were huge, and they would go far enough up the tree, driving wedges in the tree, till they could get their saw through it, and then they would cut it off, leaving great high stumps everywhere. Well, this went pretty well for several months. And then they all got poison oak.
Oh, the whole family?
The whole family.
Oh, my
Grandpa
word.
Harris, all the kids, he claimed even the horses got it.
Oh, no.
So he packed everything up in his wagon and started back east till he got out of the obnoxious weed, he also said that, and got to Pleasant Home, where he homesteaded at Pleasant Home and raised his children.
Mm-hmm. Now, he was the potato farmer?
Well, originally, he planted the tobacco.
Oh, that's right, we're on the tobacco.
He planted the tobacco. The next year he went back to Kentucky with horseback, brought back 2 more loads of tobacco, and planted it, and it grew beautifully here.
Oh.
But there wasn't anybody in Portland that knew how to roll tobacco for cigars.
Oh, no, so he had all this crop and no way to market
There
it?
was no way to market it
Oh,
at that time.
no.
So he grew potatoes and hay. And when Cliff was a little boy, they would have the wagon loaded up with the potatoes. They'd leave way in the night from Pleasant Home, go down Powell Valley Road into the early market. They would have to cross on a boat, ferry, because there were no bridges, go into the early market. They would sell this. And then, and Cliff wasn't very old, but he was the one doing it.
That's your husband.
And when he came home, he would just go to sleep in the back of the wagon. The horses would come home.
And he wouldn't even drive them? They just come all the
they
way?
just come home. The roads at that time in Gresham were corduroy roads. These are logs about this big. They're laid side by side, and you went bumpity, 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 bump. And they were still there when the cars were there, too.
Is that right? There's just so much wood, they paved the roads with
It was the way it was.
logs.
Well, there were just going to be mud holes if they didn't.
Huh. Now, how did their potato crops always flourish then? Did they do well?
Yes, the ground evidently was beautiful out this way. Perhaps we should show some of the pictures we brought.
Okay, let's do that. This one on the easel, it says 1895, and go ahead and tell us a little bit about this one.
All right, this was on Main Street, and this is the Metzger family up here in the second. Evidently, they were up in here. This is a hotel and a restaurant. These were the men at the time. This fellow had his horse. Probably, the family also probably lived in this part. These are more than likely are men who work on the road or the railroad. The railroad was very prominent. It was the only link across the country was a railroad.
It says north side of Powell near Maine. That goes a ways back. Oh, now we have some school pictures.
Okay, this was called the White School because it was the only frame building in Gresham, and it was a one-room schoolhouse. These children are in here. We have not identified them. There's no one living now that can. It was built in 1874. And it burned in the forest fire that burned a couple of years later. It burned it down.
Okay. Now, one more school.
All right, they built this one on close to where the present site of the present, what is that, West Grade School is.
West Gresham on Powell.
This is on Powell. Some of these kids have been identified.
I noticed that when we do identify some of these children, we come across names like Kane and Slarette and Eastman, and all these streets start to really have a history behind them then. And this one?
This was just back of the present school.
On West Gresham.
On West Gresham School. And when they built the new, it was built so these steps were right adjourning the steps going into to the new school. Jean Elkington tells about when she was a very little girl, she went to that school. And one day, in those days, the blackboards weren't blackboards like on a wall. They were like a window blind. You pulled them down and you wrote on them and it went back up. And so they were all having a lesson on something else altogether, and one of those blackboard things were down and writing went up and scared, just frightened them all to death. This is Mr. St. Clair in his buggy. He had the Gresham Outlook, was founder and editor.
And he's the fellow on the right here.
I hope.
I think so. We have a few more pictures. This is going to fall down, so I'll take it down here. We have a few more pictures of the Outlook in its early days from this book, Remembering Our Childhood. Let's see. Where is it? The Outlook newspaper. Here we go. I have three pictures down in this row here. The first one is 1907, when it was still called the Beaver State Herald. And then the next two are 1911. And the Outlook was actually named by Mr. Sinclair's children. So I think it's an interesting bit of history. All right. Oh, and Linneman Junction. Tell us about Linneman Junction.
Well, I'll tell you more about the light rail, or the electric cars, I should say. They came in from Portland, and one went to Bull Run. It went evidently right close to the Harris Ranch and the Markel store, which was a big store at Pleasant Home. And they would ride that thing every day. The kids go to school and get off in a little ways, and they had a yellow dog named Jack. And old Jack would go with them to school.
On the train?
On the train.
Oh, no.
And then pretty soon he'd get back on the train by himself and go back home and get off at his stop.
The conductor would let him on?
Yes, and he would go to Markel's store. He'd get on and he'd the other way, and he'd go to Markel's store, and he'd get off and go in and beg something from Mr. Markel, and then he would get back on the train and go back home.
Oh, that's funny.
But that dog did many things. He was Cliff's pride and joy all the years he was growing up.
Oh, gosh. We have one more trolley picture I'd like to share. People on their way to a picnic out at Dodge Park. I guess it really was a popular picnicking area out here at Dodge Park.
People from Portland loved to come out to Dodge Park. I'm sure it couldn't have had the big rocks in the river it has now, but they loved to come.
Out to the country. We were the country then. Oh, we slipped this in here. I would like to share this one. This is you, Arlie, when you were 1 year old and about 3 years old, right? It's so cute.
Yeah, I look just the same. I was a blonde in those days and not gray.
Well, let's go back a little bit more to the history of Gresham now.
All right.
What were some of the other buildings that have changed? What I'm getting at is we don't have a blacksmith shop. And you told me a story about the saddle shop. There used to be a saddle shop.
Oh, yes. Palmquist had a saddle shop. It was on Main, between Main and Roberts, I believe, as I recall it being told. The opening was like back of the sun and cloud tree that would be back in the alley that they had there. And he fixed all the saddles and all the harnesses and all this kind of good stuff. But it began going out. And so when we show the slides to the youngsters, we see the saddle shop. Then we see the next picture, and it has one of these tall, skinny Model A Fords, you know, and the poor man's having to learn how to be a mechanic.
Oh, because there weren't so many saddles once the cars came in.
There was no leather left, so he had to learn. Another thing they had in the early 1920s, they had a car doctor. And if you had a flat tire or anything wrong with your car, you called the car doctor, and no matter where you were around Gresham area, you went out and...
He would come to you.
Yeah, he'd come to you.
He
and
made
take
house
care of-
calls, just like the old-time doctors. That's great. And then we do have a picture of the, I think it's the Metzger store. Let's look here and see what this is. Yes, the Metzger store taken in 1918. Describe this store a little bit to us, like you would for the children.
Okay. The store in those days had, well, they had some canned goods, and they would always, for some unknown reason, be always in pyramids. I have no idea why they always fixed them at every store in town I was in. Now, they had these little bins, and you would go in there and point at the beans or the corn or peas or whatever it is you might want. And then he was back at the counter. He'd pull this bin out, take his scoop out however many pounds you wanted, and shut it back up. And this was always in the window. Of course, this is a pickle barrel. This was open, and you'd get pickled out of it.
Now, these beans and things we're looking at, those are just a front, right? Okay.
Of what is in the bin and back.
Cloud Tree and Son has their coffee displayed in these now.
Oh, they do?
The same type of thing.
Oh, let me tell you a bit about, I remember, what we were...
it's Main Street, excuse me. Main Street, right
Main
next to Cloud
yeah,
Street.
Main Street. When I was a kid, I lived in, like I said, I lived in the gorge before the dam was put in. And we raised potatoes, too, and hay. And so we had only 1 year crop, so we only paid our bills once a year. Well, when you went in the grocery store and paid your bill, they always gave a big sack of candy at the grocery store, and the butcher always gave you a whole lot of wieners. And to the kids, Of course, I was an only child, so I got all of them. They give them enough for us, just whole family, you know.
You know, we've had other people as guests whose families had stores, and both of their stores went bankrupt because the crops failed and people couldn't pay their grocery bill, and so the stores went bankrupt. And that's really too bad.
Yes, I'm sure it happened. Although I never heard of anybody ever going bankrupt. Sometimes you had to walk away and leave them.
Oh. Tell us a little bit about the berries. Gresham's known for its berries.
Okay, Mr. Cotton, I can't think what, I've got all those good things here. Okay, Mr. Cotton, in 1912, planted 50 acres of cuthbert raspberries, and that started the berry craze. They grew so well and were so much easier to take care of than the old crops that they had been raising, that soon the whole country was using all kinds of berries, planting all kinds of berries, and all the kids had a job and they had to work so hard they didn't get in trouble.
Oh, great.
That's my idea. That's my opinion.
Now, when you go see the children, you also take artifacts for them to handle.
Yes.
And you brought some for us today.
I certainly did.
Let's take these artifacts one at a time and tell us a little bit about them like you would, like we were fourth graders.
Now, this is an actual slate that was used by a second grader in 1906.
Oh, my.
And this is a, you know what slate is?
Blackboard?
It's a rock.
Oh, this is
A slice of
a
rock.
slice of rock, for heaven's sake.
And see how they're bound? And they've stayed well that many years. Okay.
Here, let's pick, I'll help you with this.
You go ahead.
How much does this thing weigh?
7 pounds.
My word.
And it's called a sad iron.
Why
And
sad iron?
Because the lady was sad who had to use it.
Boy, I would be.
You see, it's all iron. And if this is hot, this is just as hot as this is. So she would wrap a rag around it, something around it to get the heat off. And then they had petticoats and petticoats everywhere. When my oldest aunt came home, she was a school teacher, and she only had 3 petticoats on. Grandma says, "Oh, my land, you're going around naked." 3 petticoats.
She only had 3
Yeah,
petticoats.
she had left off 2 of her petticoats.
Oh, goodness.
And they all had ruffles. All of them. They had to all be ironed with those hot irons.
Oh, my word, that'd be so exhausting.
And this is a later iron.
This is one that I snuck in here. This was my grandmother's, and I don't know if it was a toy or a salesman's sample, but you fill it with either hot water or hot coals. I don't know.
Water.
Hot water? Isn't that cute?
Yeah, now that should have, it doesn't have any opening on the bottom, but
No, I don't know if it was a toy or a salesman's sample, but I've cherished that all these years.
yes, indeed, we've had those.
What is this? This is a funny looking bottle with a hole
Well,
in the
it's
top.
one I'd hate to get involved with. This is a feed an invalid. The poor guy's sick. Look at the size of this opening in here.
Choke on all that liquid.
And you put it in his mouth and pour this in, it goes down his gullet.
Oh, so he could drink laying down. 'Cause, oh my goodness. And
Well,
bookmark?
No, this is a shoehorn, and this is an
Shoehorn.
absolute necessity. No lady was going to admit that her foot size was more than 4. They all try to get in small shoes, and they all.
Or
Well, that's what my mom wore, and that's what she claimed that they all tried.
so they had to squeeze their feet in these shoes. Oh, how miserable! And walk all the way in the covered wagons. Jeez. What about this? This is
a
intrigues
real
me.
find. This is Dr. Pierce, who was an early doctor, who came over on the covered wagons, and these were the tools that he used. These are very sharp. He could take a boil off of you or a bullet out of you, whatever it might be that's wrong. Thorns, there were lots of thorns. Every place they went, they got into thorns. Take these out. This is another knife. This is really sharp. I don't let the children touch these. You could cut your goom, and then you would take this. So you got an abscessed tooth. You would take this doohickey, and if I can get it out, it probably goes the other way.
I thought it was a button hook.
No, it's not a button hook. You put this right under your tooth and pull it out. I mean, the other fellow's tooth.
Ooh, in one fell swoop, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, owie. All right, and I recognize this. This is a
Pony. It's a
horseshoe.
pony. Yeah, it's a pony shoe. Actually, it's too small. A horseshoe, any kind of a working animal shoe would be bigger than that. So this is a riding horse or pony. And I just kept that, and I have another without the nails. But lots of kids have never seen a nail that you put in a horseshoe. My grandfather, Gresham, was a blacksmith at White Salmon. So I used to go in the blacksmith shop. Let's see the car.
Oh, the
because
car.
The kids love
This is
these
heavy
cars.
too.
Well, this is cast iron too. And this is probably, 1920s somewhere this car would have been. But it is very heavy, and it would take a very strong child. Maybe when Darryl was young, he could have lifted that, but I couldn't.
And the last thing you brought was this horn.
Oh, yes. We had cattle, and we had cows. Now, there's a difference. Your cattle is beef, usually, and you call that cattle. Your cow is usually a milk cow. And you can't allow, when a cow gets spooky, could be a number of things, she'll hook the other cow, and so you have to dehorn her. And it's a regular clippers that cuts the horn off. So there was lots of them, but this one, I was about 9, 10 years old. I took and polished for years trying to make a powder horn. Finally, I wore it clear through on this side.
Oh, for heaven's
I
sake.
gave it up, but for some unknown reason, I still like it.
Oh, Arlie, that's interesting. You've kept it all these years.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, Arlie. I really have appreciated you coming and joining us this evening. Your stories are wonderful, and the artifacts are so interesting. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yes, and thank you again for having me, all of you.
And I'm Gwenda McCall. Thank you for joining us on I Remember When.